Talk, a weekly programme where we aim to give you, our viewers, the hottest news stories of the week. Our topic this week is, with the potential radicalisation of students at universities following this week's news story that Mohammed Imwaza, aka Jihadi John, was radicalised during his time at Westminster University. This week on our panel we have three special guests. Tom Slater, coordinator of the Down with Campuses censorship campaign and assistant editor at Spiked Online. I also have Dusty Amroliwala, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Chief Operating Officer here at UEL. I also have here Imran Hossain, President of the Students' Union here at UEL. So Dusty, I wanted to start off asking you a question first. What measures does UEL take in preventing radicalisation on campus?
Azana, that's a fair question to ask, but can I just unpack it before I start to give you a fuller answer? Because I think when one talks about preventing something, that we avoid understanding that an issue like radicalisation is a very nuanced one. And we all seek, I think, to minimise the instances and opportunities where radicalisation may take place. But as with any threat, whether that's the threat of assault, threat of someone selling drugs, threat of anything that we would not want to have on the campus, it's very difficult to seek to prevent it in toto. So our measures, and the reason I say this is because what we do and the way that we articulate what we do and the way that it is received by students needs to be seen as being proportionate. And I think when you go down a route where you're trying to be absolutist, you risk not being proportionate in what you do. Yeah. And so I think that's quite an important thing to say. In terms of addressing the question, though, and what lies behind your question, I think what we are trying to do is to create an environment in which students can study, can be free to debate, beyond the point of having the normal freedoms of speech in society, in fact, because we want to create an environment where students can explore and can be inquisitive about subjects which might be contentious, often are, but they can do so in a free way where they are not put at risk. What might put them at risk, principally, are other people whose agendas are different, other people who seek not to persuade intelligently and through argument and debate, but seek to persuade in a more coercive way. And it is more likely than not, although not absolutely the case, that those people aren't amongst us now. They're not part of our students. They're not part of the staff community. They are people that might come into that group. And so we have a particular focus and attention, although not exclusively, on who are those people that come from outside, who might be in a position to speak and to act in a way which we feel would go against the culture of a university.
Yeah, brilliant. And Tom, I know you've got really strong opinions about this. So the question I wanted to ask you was, with the phenomenon of young people becoming a part of extremist groups, shouldn't universities be taking measures such as these to ensure radicalisation does not happen on campuses?
I mean, first of all, I'd like to say that it's very clear that radicalisation is a problem on campus. I think there's the point at which it becomes slightly overblown, should we say, but nevertheless, with recent news this week, it's very clear that it is a problem, particularly in several London universities. But the risk of sounding like an idealist here, I think that the best way to tackle this is through free, unfettered debate and not to be tempted to try and place restrictions on these sorts of things. Because what the government is proposing currently, and what is, I would argue, already in place in universities across the country, either informally or formally, is censorship to try and tackle views we disagree with, whether it's Islamist or otherwise. And I think that's fundamentally the worst thing you can do. You lend views a glamour that they don't otherwise deserve, while at the same time you really do inflame them. Things like Islamist extremism survives off of a sense of being marginalised, about being against the mainstream, about a perceived sense of injustice. Censoring them really does nothing to tackle it. What does tackle it is by having a completely free and open forum, by able to locate, uproot and demolish these views where we find them. And I feel that by clamping down on freedom of tolerance, on the very views that these people seek to destroy effectively, you're on the one hand not tackling the problem, but also sending a signal to those people that, hey, maybe there is something legitimate to what you're saying, maybe there is a little truth to the marginal status you're trying to claim here. So I think fundamentally it's about more speech, more debate, not less.
Yeah, interesting. Imran, what do you think of head of Students' Union?
I think the problem that we are facing that sometimes we fail to integrate with the Muslim student, especially at UL. I think that from the student union perspective and the university, we should work closely with them and make sure if you look at those group who target most isolated students, especially who had the poor academic background, and there have been sometimes being isolated in the classroom, and those students who've been kicked out from the university and they go and join certain group as well. So from the beginning stage, from day one, the university and student union should work closely with those students, especially the most vulnerable one. Yeah. And you have to give them some time platform and the support as well. For example, recently we banned some of the Islamic societies event in the campus without giving them any notice. Sometimes before banning any event in the campus, sometimes we need to have a discussion with them. That way they feel comfortable as well, because those students, they are volunteer as well. They organizing event on good faith. Yeah. Of course, university has the responsibility, check the balance, do the background check, but how do you ensure that those background check is not biased?
Yeah.
So as I said, we need to working together, and with this Muslim student as well, and not make them isolated from the mainstream society.
Yeah, brilliant. Dusty, come back to you. Does banning radical speakers make students safer or shelter them from the real world?
I don't think that I would subscribe to the view that a speaker who talks in a radical way necessarily should be prohibited from speaking. So to the degree that Tom suggests, I wouldn't wish to be involved in questions around censorship, if one is to use that phrase. I do think we need to be careful when we talk about censorship of speech, because of course it is already accepted norms within our society that there are things that people should and shouldn't say in a public place or indeed in a private setting as well. We already censure and prevent under the latest act that prevents that is the Equalities Act. We do not allow and tolerate homophobic speech and protestation in a way which I think society accepts. And you don't hear, I don't think, a compelling argument to censorship not applying to those kinds of issues. So I think you've got to look more deeply under the surface of this issue. I think when it comes to the kinds of people that the university would take a view that it is intolerable to have them speak here on our campus and allow them to share and use our facilities, I think they actually largely make the decision for us, because the extent to which they go in their public utterances and the things that they say make it very, very straightforward to take a view and take a decision. So let me give you just two short examples, because they are probably two of the most recent cases that I've personally dealt with, where I have physically myself gone online, watched on YouTube clips the speeches given by preachers, where they have said that it is their view that if one confronts and meets a homosexual, then it is your duty to kill them. It is your duty, if you meet them at the top of a mountain, to throw them off the mountain. And if they're not dead when they're at the bottom of the mountain, you should stone them and make sure they are dead. Now, when you're confronted with those kinds of views and the incitement that lies behind that kind of view, I believe that it goes beyond a point of tolerance where we as an institution should then allow and facilitate that kind of level of debate amongst our student body using our premises.
Tom, in the case of Imran Hossain, why would university want to allow a speaker that espouses hate towards homosexuals to speak here?
Well, I think this comes down to the fundamental problem we have with censorship, and this extends to hate speech even, I would argue. The problem is that it's seen very negatively. It's seen about lending the freedom to these hateful, bigoted individuals to air their views in public. Whereas for me, the emphasis is very much on the audience. It's a freedom to challenge those views, to take them up on them, and to discredit them in the public forum. Because fundamentally, the thing about censorship, and this goes from hate speech onwards, I would say, is that telling someone to shut up doesn't change their mind, right? And it doesn't also change the minds of the people who might be thinking to themselves, maybe there is some legitimacy, to what they say. It fundamentally makes no difference. And I think one thing we want to be careful of in this discussion is having a bit of a phony war over censorship and free speech, because it seems that with the counter-terrorism measures, especially the kind of quite intense climate we're in at the moment, there's been a lot of quite heartening response from academics and student unions about this as an encroachment on our academic freedom, our free speech. It will target Islamic students disproportionately. But at the same time, I think that ignores the fact that free speech, as the UEL's web ranking, I would argue, has been very much eroded from within. And it's very difficult to make an argument standing up for your own academic freedom and the free speech of your students if you're not willing to practice what you preach, basically. For me, that extends to all forms of speech.
Yeah, and Imran, so I want to find out what you think, because obviously the university and student union have a no-platform policy, obviously that bans racist, fascist and anti-LGBT views. So what is your opinion
I think
on
even the beginning of the year in the council, we did pass the no platform policy. So any speaker who had homophobic, xenophobic, or any extreme ideology, they shouldn't be. We shouldn't give them permission to come to the university, because you have to look at the people. You have to not only look at the minority like Muslim, also you have to be careful that when you deal with the LGBT people as well, you know. And we have more than 10% students, as far I know, that who belong to LGBT society or the group. And we have LGBT officer as well. So there was a lot of concern was among LGBT and other group as well. And we are very diverse university as well. And when you maintain such a high level diversity, you have to be careful whom you are inviting in your institution. But you can look at the other approach of this same question, because also same question of Tom said, the freedom of speech as well. You know, people like Anjum Chaudhary, it does influence certain group of people. So you need to bring those people as well. Something you have to challenge their view. Because it seemed to me nobody really challenging those people, face to face. That's why those people influencing certain people, especially who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Yeah,
brilliant. So Dusty, I mean, does the university then consider issues such as these a free speech issue?
We certainly consider the freedom of speech issue, and we as a university, and I speak both for the student body but also for the management side of the university, we fought and pressed government very hard indeed, and were, I believe, quite influential in that large sort of voice of public opinion that said that the bill, as it was originally drafted back in November, needed to explicitly say on the face of the bill itself that anything and everything that we do within the context of counter-terrorism and managing the environment of a university must recognise the needs for academic freedom of speech under the Education Act. So that was one of the many changes government was persuaded to make because of the voice of universities. And I agree with Tom in much of what he says there. But I do think there is... I don't think you can leave this unbounded, because at the end of the day, going back to a point that I think was made very clearly by Imran, there are some people who are more vulnerable and could be more easily persuaded to do things which we would not find desirable than others. And the fact remains that if you leave this territory totally without any rules or any morality or any way of judging whether something is right or wrong in this context, that there are people, because of their backgrounds, because of the degree of vulnerability, because of the societies that they live and come from, there are people who may leave that kind of event feeling more persuaded to follow what is being said, whether it's to do with Islam, whether it's to do with homophobia, whether it's to do with other views. And what we are seeking to do in all of this work, if you would take a step back, is to ensure that we create an environment in which those things which we do not find acceptable within society are not given oxygen to breathe and grow and flourish in a university. But that isn't to say that they should not be debated, and that freedom of speech and the intellectual debates that we're having now should not take place. And there is, however, if you like, a line that you draw around it. There has to be a line, and I think, as I've said earlier, society has already drawn many of these lines, and we live with them very comfortably.
Yeah. So, Tom, I wanted to ask you, I mean, in terms of the student union deciding not to have Imran come here and speak, if a body of elected by students by no platform policy towards extremist ideologies, should that decision be respected as a democratic one?
I mean, I think the question of whether or not student unions, with all due respect, have democratic mandate is a slightly contentious one insofar as kind of student engagement with student politics is probably at a bit of an all-time low. You know, you're looking at a democratic mandate, usually about 18% voter turnout tops at most universities. It might be much higher here, I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that really needs to be taken into account. So, and there is a case, and there's been various examples of it, of SUs, when they impose certain restrictions, actually actively trying to resist them going to referendum. There was something at UOU 2 years ago, I think it was the ban on now infamous blurred lines, as silly as that is to remember that now, where they were trying to push it for referendum, and I think their exact words were, we don't want to push it out to a tyranny of the majority, and it's that kind of thing that concerns me, and I think it makes it dubious to claim democratic mandate in those circumstances. But I think the problem is that, and this is picking up on something Dusty says, that fundamentally there are very few people who share my absolute position, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't change the fact that I think we need to engage with that topic and argue for it, and argue for the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, as soon as you encroach on free speech at all, the whole purpose of a university, both academically and politically, I would say, just begins to crumble. How can you pursue knowledge if certain ideas are off the table? And how can you pursue progressive political ends if you suggest that students are vulnerable, that they need to be shielded from certain debates, that they're effectively not up to politics, I would argue. I think that's really the underlying problem. That said, I think this democratic mandate thing is a little bit dubious, and a lot of people are resisting against this. The reaction to our campaign, the reaction to our university rankings, I think, has demonstrated that.
Yeah, brilliant. Imran, do you
I think, go back to the top point, I mean, I think ULSU is a democratic organization. More than 3,000 people voted last year election. Whenever it's come to making decisions, we normally ask the student. We had a referendum, thousands of students voted that referendum, and we do work closely with the Islamic Society. We recently had a couple of meetings. They're absolutely happy with the support we are giving to them, so I don't see any problem when it's come to dealing with those issues as well.
Yeah.
And as I said, we have a council as well, so we do represent everybody, especially the minorities and LGBT women and black students as well. So it is a very democratic organization. But in a broader perspective, I think Dusty is working very closely with us as well. But university, in broader perspective, they don't have a policy, written policy. I haven't seen one. But as I said, we need to work together closely because this is an issue. This is not only at UL; it's everywhere. It's a national issue.
Yeah.
At the university, we can't do much, but we have to protect our institution as well and its reputation.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on Imran's point about not having a policy, because it's a very good point, and it's a right point to make for its time. What this university has done for many years, because it is where it is, it has the student demography that it has the issues and the geography that it has already had for many years a very well-developed set of practices in this area. But you're right to say that they haven't been written down. They are now being written down, because what we all recognise is that we need to bring transparency to those practices and those processes. We need to be able to share them and explain them and articulate them to those people that aren't involved in them on a day-to-day basis, so that we can better engage in them. So those practices are now being enshrined in and codified, and we will be sharing with you in due course what a first draft of that looks like. But the point to make is that I don't think you'll see much departure from what is already the norm at a university like this, because I don't think we for a moment think of it in terms of fear or overreaction or indeed underreaction. I think actually what a lot of the bill sets out to do, you'll find that across the United Kingdom in higher education institutions, there are plenty of pockets of good examples of good practice where much of what is being asked of us is already in place. And I would say, and I hope others would agree, that the University of East London has to do very little in terms of changing its practices to ensure that we comply with our requirements. The one thing I think we can do better, and we're seeking to do better, is to give people more notice of what we're doing, so things can be planned in a more thoughtful way. And we ask the same. So when events are being planned and speakers are being invited, we ask to be given as much notice as we can, and therefore we in turn can do what we need to do. They organise with external speakers who are thoroughly professional, articulate, and still sometimes radical in their views.
Yeah.
And that is entirely right.
In the case of banning Imran Hossain, are these regulations made out of fear?
I think it's less a case of a fear, but definitely an insecurity. I think this brings up. We've been talking a lot about values in this discussion. So we've been talking about, being perhaps much, being tolerant, being egalitarian, perhaps, not standing for the sorts of views which these people are coming here to espouse. But I think that's essentially the problem. What we have here, I think, both in terms of the university management blocking speakers from coming, as well as kind of progressive student groups trying to do the same, and no platform people, it's a failure of nerve, I'd say, on behalf of them and their values. Rather than trying to challenge these things, they treat them almost as a kind of almost like an infected, almost like a virus. Like there's nothing you can do to tackle this.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to a lack of political and moral conviction to a certain extent, and also a kind of inward-looking nature. And I say this again with respect, especially with regards to student politicians and the no platform policy, because fundamentally that's not outward looking, that's not about how we can change the world, that's about how we can hem ourselves in from it so that our members won't be offended. And fundamentally I see that as a big problem. What this has shown up is probably not so much fear, but certainly political, moral, philosophical insecurity, I would say.
Yeah, and that's Imran.
Because when I had a meeting with the Islamic Society, I think one of the things, they don't even want to bring those speakers as well in the campus. Even most of the time when we want to invite any guest speaker, we normally go to the Google and we search the list and come up with the name, and we normally invite them. So, but it seemed to me even they don't want to bring those speakers, and that's why they want to cooperate with us as well. So I don't see any problem here. But it seemed everybody want to work here together and want to make this place safer. Even the Islamic Society, they had a charity week last month. It was very successful. They brought a few speakers as well, and we didn't have any problem because they followed the right procedures as well.
Yeah.
And you have to sometimes remember that every year we form a new committee, the society committee, and that they are entirely new people. They don't know anything about the policy and procedure. So, they're very enthusiastic as well. But from the beginning, we need to really speak with them. Yeah. I think they have the same value as we have. They're no different than us. They're a human being as well.
Yeah, so you think it's less about fear, but more about a value system?
Yes.
Is that where you're
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. That's all we've got time for this week. Make sure you tune in next week for more Hot Talk.